Welcome, beautiful people, to Camp Koji. My name is Joel, and thank you for joining me as I break down the biggest gaming news from the week that was on the only podcast you will ever need. Now, on today's show, we're going to talk about the future of Ubisoft's Division franchise, Sony getting sued over a proposed monopoly, and we're going to dive deep into the Epic versus Apple trial. But first, let's talk about Stadia. Vice President and Head of Product at Stadia, John Justice, who joined Google in early 2019, left his role at Stadia and Google itself. We learned about it last week, but apparently this might have been between the months of April and May. 6 members of Google Stadia's staff have also left for new roles at Haven Studio, the venture founded by former Stadia VP Jade Raymond, who are working on a PlayStation exclusive title. Now, this comes just a few months after Google decided to shut down all internal game development at the company. Now, obviously, not just on my show, but pretty much across the internet, we've learned that Stadia has become pretty much the butt of the jokes when it comes to our industry and just kind of video games and gaming in general, just because of the epic failure that Google committed when it came to the launch of Stadia. And the one thing that I always think about when I think about Stadia is you have an amazing piece of technology, but it also shows that no matter how amazing your technology is, if you can't execute it correctly, if you can't sell it correctly, if you don't enter into a brand new industry in the most humble way you possibly can, then there's nothing left for you but absolute failure. And I think I've spoken about this before, but I really do believe that Google looked at our industry in terms of, look at how much money this industry is able to pull in. You know, we can throw a dart randomly blindfolded and we'll hit something. We'll hit some sort of success. Obviously, that did not go their way. And I mean, it's pretty obvious why a lot of these employees will be jumping ship. It's pretty crazy to see their head of product actually leaving not just a Stadia project, but actually leaving Google as a company. You know, that kind of goes to show you how much friction probably was behind the scenes that we weren't really aware of. And then to hear 6 members of that staff leave in order to actually work for, you know, a real studio that is being backed not only just financially by PlayStation, but is also being supported by PlayStation. And it's good to, you know, for the creation of a brand new studio to be able to focus on just a single platform. So, you know, best of luck to all of them. But obviously I would like to say we're seeing the beginning of the end for Stadia, but we've kind of been seeing it for a while, especially once they announced that they were pretty much done with creating games, which, you know, I always said was an absolutely dumb idea. I don't know why they thought something like that would work. So let's move on to our first story, which is about The Division. Ubisoft announced the newest addition to the Division franchise, titled The Division Heartland. It will be free to play and take place in the same universe as the first 2 games. For those that don't remember, Division 1 was set in New York City, while Division 2 was set in Washington, D.C. It will release on PC, last-gen, and current-gen consoles, and I believe it is also coming to Stadia and other streaming platforms. Now, they also released this visual timeline that shows a Division mobile game coming, although they did not give us absolutely any details in terms of what type of game it would be, and a novel, which I don't think was a new announcement, but honestly, it was something that I had no idea even existed. And both of those are releasing following the release of Division Heartland. And they also have in the timeline new content for Division 2 coming out. And Ubisoft wanted to remind us that they are still in production for that Division film that is coming to Netflix. You can sign up for a chance to participate in an early test phase for Division Heartlands by visiting Ubisoft's website. Now, when this announcement was made, honestly, we got pretty much no information in terms of what type of game this is going to be. All they said was pretty much the only clues we have are that it is free to play. It's being developed by Ubisoft's Red Storm Studio, one of their oldest studios, well known for their early work on Rainbow Six. And most recently, they moved on to being a support studio for various Ubisoft releases, including the first 2 Divisions. But our biggest clue in terms of what type of game this is was this sentence from the press release, which reads, Heartland is a standalone game that doesn't require previous experience with the series, but will provide an all-new perspective on the universe in a new setting. And the key word there to me is new perspective. This could mean that the game is a first-person shooter. Obviously, the Division is historically a third-person action game. Red Storm Studios is, as I said, well known for their very early work on Rainbow Six. Not saying that's definitively why it would be first person, but I think that Ubisoft is still trying to find their really big, successful multiplayer first person title outside of Rainbow Six. Let's just kind of be honest, Far Cry never really did well when it came to multiplayer. It's not really their thing. And when we think about Hyperscape, most people probably even forgot that game even existed. It was one of those titles that the moment they announced it, I remember saying this announcement, the marketing plan they came up with was just absolutely awful. The rollout of information was just horrendous when it came to that game. And it just wasn't unique enough. It shows just how, I guess for lack of a better term, fickle the free-to-play FPS market is right now when it comes to making sure that not only that you release a battle royale, but that you're doing something that feels fresh, especially if you're introducing a brand new intellectual property. The good thing about doing something like this, Division Heartland, and let's say it does have a battle royale mode, is that it's still attached to the Division IP. So it's not as important for them to do something that's completely fresh, that has a very, very unique hook, as it would have been for something like Hyperscape, which, I mean, as I said, the popularity of that title is just awful right now. I think if you go to Twitch, you'll probably find an average of about 100 viewers watching that game. It definitely fell from grace after that first beta week that they had. After that, not many people even remember that game even exists. So I think it will be interesting to see this be a first-person game. And then Heartlands, for those that didn't know, that sort of alludes to the Midwest in the United States. So this game could probably be set in Michigan or maybe Ohio. If you look at the one image that they released, shows like a water tower that sort of gives you that Midwest feel, kind of like Ohio, I guess. Maybe it'll be somewhere along those lines. So you can see how that type of setting would work pretty well for something like a battle royale. But honestly, I'm kind of hoping that there is a free-to-play co-op experience somewhere in there. I think there is enough room in the FPS free-to-play arena right now to have something compelling in terms of a 4-player co-op type of game instead of everything just being about versus multiplayer. But seeing as this is free to play, I do not expect this to be something that's going to be heavily story driven, but maybe a co-op game that gives you a lot of unique settings, kind of maybe procedurally generated, everything kind of changes up, and then also something with a versus mode I think would be really interesting. But it's good to see Ubisoft continue to invest into the Division. I think they have a really good intellectual property over there at Ubisoft, but their biggest issue with the Division is being able to retain their audience, especially when it comes to their updates. And I think a lot of that a lot of that does have to do with the fact that the Division doesn't have a really, really strong multiplayer presence. And I think in order to keep word of mouth going for your game nowadays, it has to have some sort of multiplayer component to it, because I think that's kind of the most interesting thing to watch for Twitch. And it sort of sounds a little bit weird to think that developers should be catering their games to a Twitch audience or with a Twitch audience in mind, or would a Twitch streamer actually stream this game on a regular occurrence if they aren't already kind of a big Division streamer? And I think you need some sort of multiplayer component in order for something like that to work. But I think that it's good that they are investing into this franchise, because it is a huge franchise for Ubisoft, but it could be even bigger if they continue to stretch it out. And everything that they're doing, especially with the Division film on Netflix, they're really going the right way. Our next story has to do with Sony getting sued. Now, Sony is being accused of operating an unlawful monopoly by restricting purchases of PlayStation games to its PlayStation Store. Now, 2 years ago, Sony stopped selling digital download codes for its games through retailers like Amazon, Best Buy, and Walmart. And according to the lawsuit, people end up paying as much as 175% more for downloadable games than the same ones on disc. Now, here's a quote from the class action lawsuit. Sony's monopoly allows it to charge super competitive prices for digital PlayStation games, which are significantly higher than their physical counterparts sold in a competitive retail market, and significantly higher than they would be in a competitive retail market for a digital game. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this is something that is just being introduced as a potential class action lawsuit. It is something that, once again, by definition, it being a class action lawsuit, if you would have purchased a digital game in the period of time that they designate for the lawsuit, fortunately, I'm not really sure exactly what that period of time is, then you could be subject to some sort of compensation for the inconvenience that Sony caused you to pay more for the digital game than you would physically. Now, do I believe that this lawsuit will get anywhere? No, I actually do not think this lawsuit will get absolutely nowhere. I think the key defense that Sony will put up is kind of a simple one, which is you can just buy a game physically if you feel like our digital prices are too expensive. This isn't to say that, let's say, for example, this would be very different if the PlayStation 5 was a digital-only console. Then, effectively, there is absolutely zero competition. If you want that new copy of NBA 2K22, then you have to buy it straight through Sony, and they are going to charge it a $70 price, and maybe they're going to keep it $70 much longer than a Best Buy or Walmart or Amazon would if they were selling a physical or digital version of that exact game. Now, Sony is the only platform that does this. Both Nintendo and Microsoft do still allow retailers like Amazon to sell digital download codes, and Amazon, I know for a fact, does sort of regularly put up sales for the digital codes. I remember, I want to say like 2 months ago, and it's kind of funny bringing this up because I haven't even actually started the game because I've been so busy. They had Watch Dogs Legions, like the super digital edition that normally costs like $100. They had it for like, I think it was like $15-20. So I sort of immediately scooped it up. I'm not sure if it was a price mistake. I think it kind of was, but even with that, price mistake, the regular digital copy is, oftentimes on Amazon is up there for like $20 or $30. So I guess when you're talking about competition within retailers, Sony sort of loses when it comes to not allowing these other retailers to sell digital download codes, because if you're a person like me that owns multiple consoles, maybe you own 2 out of the 3, or maybe you own all 3. If you go to Amazon, finding out that they have a physical sale, and usually Amazon will match their digital codes to the physical sale also. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. At that point, if you choose to say to yourself, I don't want to wait 1 or 2, 3 days for that physical copy to come in from Amazon, I'm going to buy the digital version. Now, if the digital version, I can only get it for the Xbox Series X, then effectively now, because of what Sony did, now I no longer have choices of consumers. So do I think that this move is anti-consumer? Yes, I do. But Sony, I've brought this up before, Sony is really a company that I won't say that they pinch pennies. I don't think that's really the way to put it. But they are a company that always looks at ways to bolster their bottom line. Like they're not the company that will step forward first and say, hey, let's do something amazing, something that will benefit gamers, something that will benefit our fans in a short or even especially in a long term. If it's something that's going to, they're going to have to spend a lot of money on. So when we think of Microsoft with the Xbox adaptive controller made specifically for gamers who have a disability, I would never imagine Sony to do something like that, because that's a product that you're selling almost at this break-even point, and it's a product that you put a lot of R&D into, and you do it with the express purpose of, hey, this is something that I know a lot of gamers around the world need in order to just even interact with our software. And Microsoft, when they went into that project, you're talking about spending a lot of money in R&D and testing and all this stuff that you have to put into it. I'm sure when Microsoft and Xbox did that, they did not expect to make a profit off of it. That's why you would never expect Sony to do something like that. And that's not me, saying that Sony's this horrible company for doing that. It's just the way that they choose to run their company. So I could see why Sony would not allow these other retailers to do digital download codes, because obviously now they do sort of hold a bit of a monopoly in terms of, if you are a player that either A, owns the digital edition of the PlayStation 5, or you choose to buy digital games at any point in time, you're probably not going to get the best deal on a recent game compared to if you went to seek a download code from Amazon or Best Buy or Walmart. Now, I will say Sony does put up sales. It's not like Sony never, ever lowers the prices of their digital games. But I think the point of this lawsuit being brought up is that there is no parity when it comes to sales of Amazon. If we see Best Buy drop the price of a game, usually Amazon matches them in order to stay competitive. If your PlayStation, especially if you put yourself in the kind of thought process of a person who owns the PlayStation 5 digital edition, if Amazon were to put The Last of Us Part 2 on sale for $39.99 for that digital copy, or for the physical copy, you have no choice. You can't buy it digitally at that point. You have to go through Sony's pricing, and who knows how long it'll be until a premier title from PlayStation, such as Last of Us 2 or the upcoming Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, who knows when those games digitally will go below, $69.99, maybe Black Friday, kind of once in the blue. But because there exists a physical version of the PlayStation 5, and I'm going to assume that the bulk of this lawsuit deals with the PlayStation 4, since the PlayStation 5 is still relatively new. It kind of wouldn't make sense for a lot of the arguments for this lawsuit to piggyback on the PlayStation 5. Most of it is going to be focused on the numbers that are generated with the PlayStation 4. And at that point, the only thing that Sony is going to bring up is the fact that you as a consumer do still have a choice. You can choose to buy those games physically, or they're going to bring up the fact that you can still go to retailers and buy PlayStation Store money. You just can't directly get codes. And I'm sure Sony will come up with some BS about, protecting their consumers. That's usually the one thing that companies come up with when they're doing something shady. Which brings us to our final story involving Apple. So I wanted to save as much time as possible for the story, because we definitely do have a lot to go over. But our main story of the week deals with Epic versus Apple. So last week was the beginning of the Epic versus Apple trial, which is set to last 3 weeks, and it quickly became one of the most extensive peeks behind the scenes of our industry, as Apple tried to prove that Epic Games can survive without the App Store and iOS, and that the App Store itself is not a monopoly. Now, some of the things we heard range from financial information, unannounced Fortnite skins, and just the absolute ridiculous, such as this email that Tim Sweeney sent to Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot, apologizing after a large number of pirates fraudulently acquired Division 2 and made up 70 through 90% of the transactions during that period of time. But I'm not going to discuss every single thing that was talked about during this trial. We'd be here forever, but we're going to go over some key points. Now, before we dive into the trial itself, let's have a quick primer on how we got here. Now, in August 2020, Epic lowered the price of V-Bucks across platforms and added a direct payment system as an alternative for iOS and Google Play users to access the discount. Doing so would mean that Epic would be paid directly and thus not giving Apple and Google the 30% cut Epic originally agreed to when they joined both stores. Now, Apple removed them from the store almost immediately, and Google followed a few hours later. Then we quickly discovered this was all part of an elaborate campaign from Epic called Free Fortnite, and I think the internal term was Project Liberty, and it was an attempt to weaponize their fan base to publicly smear Apple while simultaneously filing a lawsuit against Apple alleging antitrust violations. The main point of this lawsuit is not just to put Fortnite back on the stores, but to prove Apple's iOS store is essentially a monopoly that does not allow for competitors, and its 30% fee for processing simple transactions is not only anti-competitive, but more of a reflection of Apple's dominance in the space, thus proving a monopoly. Now, let's go over the key things we learned last week. So I want to give shout outs to GameSpot, GamesIndustry.biz, and The Verge. These webs for compiling a lot of this information that was shared throughout the first week of the trial. I definitely did not sit down and listen to the trial for the days that went on. I think it was 3 or 4 days last week. I sure as heck was not sitting down to 6 hours of that. Other people get paid to do that, and I thank them for giving me the cliff notes on the most important things that were discussed during this trial. Now, before the trial began, we learned that Epic intentionally withheld Fortnite from appearing on Xbox Game Pass and xCloud because Epic views the service as a direct competitor. Now, I found this to be weird because Fortnite is streamable on NVIDIA's GeForce Now service. So I kind of don't understand how they look at Microsoft as a direct competitor when it comes to this, especially since this is a really good avenue and opportunity for you to get Fortnite back on iOS, especially now that Microsoft is doing their xCloud testing. I mean, yes, you could use NVIDIA GeForce Now in order to do it, but I think you need to have a copy purchased or copy downloaded on a PC somewhere in order for you to access that. I'm not sure if you can just directly sign on to your Epic Games account through GeForce Now in order to have access to the game. I'm actually not 100% sure exactly how that works. But, the way that Fortnite grew was Epic put it on as many platforms as humanly possible. So the fact that you would hold this back from xCloud is sort of weird, especially because Microsoft has already announced plans that at some point in the future, you will be able to stream games straight from your Xbox console. So if you have a disc in there, for example, you'll be able to stream the games that are on your console anywhere in the world. So if you have Fortnite saved to your console and, it's not added to xCloud, unless Epic Games tells Microsoft explicitly, no, we do not want to be part of the streaming program, which I'm sure Microsoft is going to get approval from every developer to do something like this. That was the issue that NVIDIA ran into, was that they just started putting people's games onto their servers without actually having discussions with publishers and developers. I'm sure maybe there might be some publishers and developers that are going to say, no, we don't want a user to be able to stream our game, even if they own it, if they're streaming it from their console. I mean, who knows if, I don't know why a company would want to do that, but like I said, since that's already being planned, I don't understand why Epic wouldn't want Fortnite on xCloud. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. We also learned that PlayStation 4 was the biggest driver of Fortnite revenue from March 2018 through July 2020. Xbox followed in second place, and iOS accounted for just 7% of total Fortnite revenue during the same period. We also found out that Epic had spent $1 billion to secure exclusivity deals for 110 games. This included $115 million for Borderlands 3, which sounds like a lot, but Epic's investment was covered within its first 2 weeks of sales, and 53% of people who purchased Borderlands 3 were brand new to the Epic Game Store. So it was definitely a very, very smart investment from Epic. They also spent at least $11.6 million to give away 38 games, but they gained 5 million new users in the process. Epic also expects the game store to be profitable by 2024. Now, these losses are really smart investments in order to bolster your user base. I know that kind of on the surface, it sounds like a lot of money in order to invest into just giving games away for free. But honestly, if you crunch the numbers, and they did, I actually don't have the data right in front of me. They crunched the numbers down into exactly how much they paid. You know, basically, whenever you advertise for a business, you have what's called a customer acquisition cost. And once they crunched down the numbers, it just made a lot of sense. It was actually cheaper than doing something that that would not be as effective, which would be running ads, on social media sites like TikTok and Twitter. This is actually the better way to do it because you're speaking directly to a consumer. And I think Epic calculated is that if you went to the Epic Game Store and you downloaded any of the free games that they offered, and all you spent was $20 in the store, they actually made their money back and then some. It was a profitable advertisement in that sense. So this was actually absolutely the smartest decision for them to make in order for giving away free games to be a loss leader. Now, one of Apple's biggest points of contention is that Epic does not need iOS in order for Fortnite to be successful. Epic revealed that over 2018 and 2019, Fortnite grossed $9 billion just over those 2 years alone. And for those that forgot, 2020, which is the money that we don't know exactly what they made, that was the year of the pandemic, obviously, so it's probably even more. Now, between January 2017 and October 2020, Epic paid approximately $237 million to Apple, $246 million to Microsoft, and $451 million to Sony, once again proving that PlayStation 4 is the biggest platform. Now, this was presented by Apple as evident that iOS is not the biggest platform for Fortnite, but Epic paid out just $9 million less to Apple over Microsoft, but the sales were in the same exact period of time. So it's still a pretty huge user base for iOS. Now, we also learned about Epic's initial attempts to get Sony to allow crossplay for Fortnite and Sony not seeing how it would benefit the PlayStation platform. Now, for those that forgot, Epic announced Fortnite coming to Switch at E3 2018 and launching with crossplay. PlayStation was the only platform that did not support cross-platform play. And then, pretty much unanimously, all of us as gamers were really angry at Sony for not playing ball. For those that remember, Microsoft and Nintendo started running ads about how great it was to be able to play games together, such as Minecraft, sort of in a way to poke fun at Sony for not wanting to join the party. Now, Epic even went out of their way to offer various incentives to get Sony to allow crossplay, including giving them all the data that they requested, deeply integrating Sony's esports API into UE4 as an engine level feature, announcing the feature at any timing Sony chooses in order to make them look like heroes for allowing it, committing a game for the launch of their next VR platform. They even offered to create a unique character for PlayStation Plus subscribers in order to drive growth. And they even talked about extending Sony's company-wide Unreal Engine 4 license. All of this, and Sony still said no. And their senior director of developer relations at the time, Gio Corsi, responded by saying, quote, "Cross-platform play is not a slam dunk, no matter the size of the title. As you know, many companies are exploring this idea, and not a single one can explain how cross-console play improves the PlayStation business. Now, that led to one big piece of information that we learned that apparently was never supposed to be publicly divulged, but Pandora's box, once it was out there, which was that Sony requires Epic to pay them compensation for allowing crossplay. Now, according to Tim Sweeney, quote, in certain circumstances, Epic will have to pay additional revenue to Sony. Sorry, I just lost my point. Sorry, in certain circumstances, Epic will have to pay additional revenue to Sony. If somebody were primarily playing on PlayStation but paying on iPhone, then this might trigger compensation. Now, I know on the surface, this sounds like PlayStation just being greedy. But once again, as I said, just like 20 minutes ago, Sony is always on the lookout for bolstering their bottom line. And honestly, it's what makes them a great company. Now, once again, it sounds like they're being greedy on the surface compared to Xbox and Nintendo, who don't do something like this. But actually, it's a really, really smart business decision once you understand how it works and once you break it down. First off, Sony already had leverage in the situation since PS4 was the dominant platform for Fortnite. So that was information that we did not know during 2018. At that point in time, Epic Games did not let anyone know exactly what was the dominant platform that Fortnite was being played on. Now we know how much more money PlayStation generates for Fortnite compared to all of the other platforms. We just talked about them paying out about $230 million to Microsoft and Apple, and compared to Sony's, which was the payout was, I think it was over $450 million or something like that I just read off. Secondly, this is a fee that only kicks in when other platforms gain a cut that should have gone to PlayStation since the user is playing primarily on Sony's platform. Now, this is why the deal makes the utmost sense. And honestly, I feel like if you were Nintendo and Microsoft and you read this, at this point, you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, that's actually a really good deal. It really makes the utmost sense. What this means is that if you're playing the PlayStation 4 version the most, but when you're away from home, someone tells you, hey, there's this new, the Travis Scott skin is back in the store, and you go on your iOS version of Fortnite just to go into the store to buy the Travis Scott Fortnite skin, but you don't actually ever play the Apple version, you just kind of go home and always play the PlayStation 4 version, then technically who should receive that revenue? Should it be Apple because you bought it from iOS, or should it be PlayStation because that's the place where you primarily play? And honestly, Sony's 100% right when it comes to this. It should be on PlayStation. Now, the question that PlayStation kept asking, which was, how is this beneficial to our platform? And this was actually an aspect of it that honestly, I can even say I didn't even think about, because we can look at it as from a customer service and a customer experience perspective. This is the right thing to do. I've been saying this for a while, that every multiplayer game hopefully will be launching with cross progression and crossplay in some way, shape, or form, especially because, we've gotten to this point right now where all three platforms are doing really, really good. Like, I feel like back in the days, a decade ago, we had a clear-cut first, second, and third place for as long as I can remember in video games, even back when Sega was around before Xbox, replaced them as the big three platforms in our games industry. There have always been a first, second, and third place. This generation that we're in right now, kind of carrying over from the last generation, this is the first time that all three platforms are doing really, really great. And there's no real way to use numbers to sort of legitimize who's being victorious, so to speak, in this generation. Like, PlayStation, I said before, will definitely sell more hardware than Xbox, but that's not how Xbox is gauging their success. And then the same thing goes for Nintendo. Even though they might not sell as much software as the PlayStation 4 did last generation, as much hardware, their software attach rate is way higher than the other two platforms, for example. So each of them kind of have their own success their own successes. We see Nintendo going on mobile, which is something that Microsoft and Sony haven't really invested in. We see Sony about to continue investing into VR. That's a success that you can't really gauge against Microsoft and Nintendo. So going forward, this sort of business deal makes a lot of sense. And I almost could see Microsoft and Nintendo almost, not even almost, but definitely replicating this, especially if we're talking about a game that exists on a mobile platform. As I said before on this show, and I think it was when I had the Time to Go Mobile episode, I talked about how much easier it is for people to spend money on their cell phone rather than any other place, and that includes your PC and includes your game console. There's something about impulse purchasing that our minds are so hardwired to our cell phones. And I can see this continue happening. And even if we think about a game like Apex Legends, this means that Sony definitely also has this deal in place with Apex Legends. There's no way that they would allow it for PlayStation, but not allow it for any other company. And honestly, once again, it makes sense. If you're playing Apex Legends a lot on PlayStation 4 or your PlayStation 5, but you're spending money and buying stuff on the phone when you're kind of on the go, the mobile version, maybe if they have cross progression, for example, it does make sense for PlayStation to get that money. So this is actually a really, really good idea. I definitely would not sort of look at it as Sony being greedy in any way, shape, or form. Honestly, it's just a really, really smart business decision. Now, Lori Wright, who is Xbox's Vice President of Gaming Media Entertainment, testified and revealed a few obvious points, such as PlayStation being Xbox's main competitor and Nintendo to a lesser extent, and acknowledging that iPhone was not seen as a competing device. Nothing new there. We already knew that. Now, she also confirmed what we've always known, which is that Xbox hardware is sold at a loss. Now, this was an interesting point because when I read this part of her testifying, it was something that I said to myself, this sort of quote sounds like it's taken a little bit out of context, because the way she's saying it is that Xbox hardware has always been sold at a loss. And I personally find that a little bit hard to believe that none of Xbox's hardware, even the revisions, the Xbox S, for example, or the Xbox All Digital Edition, for me to sit here and believe that none of those hardware has made any sort of profit, even if it was $10 from the cost that it took to build, sounds a little bit hard to believe. And Apple found the same issue that I did, because in the trial, as this admission caused Apple to attempt to have her testimony thrown out, as Microsoft does not submit financial data to back this claim. So basically, she said it, but Microsoft does not want to divulge any financial information. This is something that we've known about Microsoft. They're very tight-lipped, especially when it comes to their Xbox division and their different market drivers, their profits. So it's something that she said, but Microsoft is refusing to actually give data to prove that this is correct. So Apple is trying to argue with the judge, or he opened up an argument with the judge in order to try to get her testimony thrown out. And we'll have to find out some point this week if that's going to be successful. But honestly, it should be successful, because it's kind of true. If you say something and you can't prove it in court that this is true, then the testimony has actually a high chance of being thrown out. But there are a lot of interesting things that she did bring out, which would actually be damaging if this testimony were thrown out. Part of the testimony was distinguishing the difference between a special purpose device like the Xbox, which is a device purchased and used for singular purpose, which is to play video games, versus a general purpose device like a Windows PC. Now, when you have this distinction in mind, it's hard to not consider iOS devices as anything but a special purpose device. Now, this goes into the argument about Apple having a monopoly when it comes to iOS. Now, think about if you sat down at your Windows PC and you can only buy games through the Windows Store. There was, no Steam, no Epic Game Store, no itch.io. Anytime you needed to install a new program, you had to go through the Windows Store. You couldn't install a program straight from a manufacturer's website. For example, you can understand how annoying something like that is, but the reason why it's annoying is because the PC has become such a general purpose device. When PCs were first introduced, they were really, work driven. It was really a device that you bought to do work, whether it was, typing up documents or sending emails, all these different things. But at this point, you can't really classify a PC as one thing. You can use it to play games. You can use it to create art. You can use it to edit video, create music. The guy mentioned play games already. I can't even remember. There's a lot that you can do with a PC, which is why it's a general purpose device. Now, the same goes for the iPhone. Actually, even from the first moment that the iPhone was introduced, it was never a special purpose device. Usually phones, their biggest feature are the phones or making phone calls. And at this point for Apple and the iPhone, making a phone call is actually at the bottom of the list of things you think of when someone asks you, hey, what do you do on your iPhone? Now you talk about you're browsing the internet, you're making purchases, you can run businesses straight up off your iPhone. You can create things like art, you can interact on social media, listen to music, watch films, watch TV shows. There's so many things that you can do. And this is a really, really strong argument against Apple and how strict they are with two things. Number one, the fact that their fee is 30%. They take away 30% from every single transaction that goes through an iOS device, so whether that's an iPhone or a tablet. And then the second thing is that they only allow the App Store. No other stores are allowed. The other argument that they make is that this is done for the safety of the consumer, just so your iPhone won't get any viruses or bugs or crashes or anything like that. But the counter to that is a really strong one, which is, well, you don't do that for the MacBook. You have Mac OS, and on Mac OS, I can install programs from, different websites and different manufacturers. There are various storefronts that I can use on the Mac. So that argument doesn't really hold up, because then by Apple's own admission, they are admitting that the Mac OS is less secure than the iPhone or less secure than the PC, which is the opposite. They've always talked about, how secure the Mac is in terms of not really getting viruses or bugs compared to something like the PC. Now, this loops back to Xbox losing money on hardware, meaning they generally rely on that 30% cut a lot more than Apple would with iPhones, because iPhones generate between 30 through 40% gross margin profit per iPhone sold. So when you think about Xbox, they rely on that 30% a lot more than Apple needs to, because every time Xbox sells a console, and the same goes for a PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and I'm sure the S is the same right now, they're all sold at a loss. They can lose anywhere from $50 to $100 for every single console that they sell, but they make that money back because, when you bring the Xbox home, you're signing onto Xbox, you're paying for Xbox Live Gold, you're paying for PS Plus, maybe you're buying digital games. When you do decide to buy Call of Duty or play Call of Duty Warzone, you're spending money on microtransactions, and all those Xbox and PlayStation get a 30% cut. So that cut is really necessary in order to offset the money that they're losing for every single time that they sell a box. Now, we also found out about how Xbox felt about The Last of Us Part 2, along with praising their visuals. Their thoughts mirrored kind of exactly how I felt about the game. Quote, The Last of Us Part 2 is the exceedingly rare video game where what it accomplishes in moving forward the art of narrative storytelling in video games as a medium ultimately outweighs whether or not everyone likes it, or even if everyone has fun playing with it. As for the choice to split the narrative between Ellie and Abby, Xbox says players have every right to their feelings on Naughty Dog's two protagonists and the game's final contentious outcome. But ultimately, for folks who care about the evolution and expansion of what storytelling and interactive entertainment can be, those things ultimately matter less than how incredibly well Naughty Dog has crafted and delivered the story that they wanted to tell. Excuse me. I had to grab a drink. Now, this was really interesting to read because number one, this isn't rare. Every company and almost every publisher does this. They usually have a small group of employees dedicated to researching, new things that companies are working on, or actually testing out and playing, testing out brand new hardware and kind of giving their synopsis. So the moment that the Switch Lite launches, I'm sure both Xbox and PlayStation have employees dedicated to going out, picking up a copy of that hardware, and just sort of having a write-up on it, giving their assessment on it, compared to something like the original Nintendo Switch, compared to gaming on their cell phone, for example. And the same goes for these big AAA titles. I'm sure somewhere within PlayStation, someone has a review written for Gears 5 in terms of, hey, what did they do with Gears 5 that was successful that we would like to replicate or bring over onto PlayStation? I'm sure Microsoft has done this with more than just The Last of Us Part 2. But what was interesting to me about reading this was that the write-up was exactly how I personally felt about The Last of Us Part 2, which was, it was a game that, I did enjoy the game. I did not like the ending, especially the fact that I wasn't given a choice in the ending. I did not like the decision of having these two protagonists. I think it was something that it either worked for you or it didn't work. And if it didn't work, it destroyed sort of the last few hours of the game, in my opinion. Now, with all that being said, I mirror exactly what the people within Microsoft, whoever wrote this, actually had to say about the game, which was none of that actually matters in terms of, how sort of important and how amazing this game is sort of in the larger picture. When you think about how amazing the narrative was, just from a technical perspective, from a voice acting and just an acting perspective, from the perspective of directing, like the game did so much right that it's impossible to drag the game down simply because you didn't like the story or you didn't like the choices that Naughty Dog made. And that's exactly the camp that I sort of went into, which was, man, I didn't like the story. It didn't really click for me. I did not like that ending, but none of it really mattered because this is, without a doubt, one of the greatest games that has ever been released. Definitely one of the greatest games of that generation to wrap up that generation. And that's sort of something that, you can't argue. You can, whether you love it or hate it, you have to respect what Naughty Dog did. So it's really cool to see that Microsoft felt the same exact way. Now, Apple also tried to argue that Epic allows offensive and sexualized games on their platform, which was a really funny moment because they carry itch.io on the store. Now, that is a platform that does allow adult games, but Apple would not sort of let this issue go. And Epic's argument was very, very simple. We carry the storefront, but when you download itch.io, they have their own terms. They have their own conditions. You have to sign up for a unique username. It's not like if you are an Epic user, you automatically have a subscription or you are automatically made a user of itch.io. I'm sure itch.io has their own sort of age gates in place to make sure that these types of games are not seen by minors. So it was just a really, really stupid argument. And it got to the point where during this trial, there are a lot of things that Apple brought up that were, honestly kind of petty. It's like there was at one point where they were pointing out how the Epic Game Store has a top 20 list, but they actually have 25 games on it. Like Apple's lawyers were bringing up just like the weirdest, dumbest, pettiest shit that you could bring up during a trial as big as this one. It was just kind of really weird. I was going to say weird to see, but actually weird to hear. So this argument about, Epic Game Store has adult games because the itch.io storefront has adult games doesn't really make any sense. That's like saying, Apple, you guys have porn because I can, go on my Safari browser and view porn. You understand? Like it really doesn't make sense. Or because there's a porn app on the iPhone, that means that iPhone, that Apple is a platform for sexual content. It just, that argument was just really, really stupid. And I kind of can't believe they even tried to play that card. Now, another interesting thing that we found out was that Epic reached out to Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo in an attempt to get exclusive first-party games on the Epic Game Store. They offered Sony $200 million for 4 to 6 titles. Obviously, for all that we know, this failed. The last game that they announced was Days Gone. We already know that Horizon was available on Steam. I'm trying to remember if it was also on the Epic Game Store. I think it is, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure. But what I know for a fact is that it's not an Epic exclusive. The same goes for Days Gone. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that Sony sort of didn't go along with this in a sense, even if it was just a 1 month or 2 month exclusivity deal, or maybe working with Epic to give them some exclusive in-game items. Think about what Kojima did with Death Stranding, where Steam had this exclusive head crab and kind of all this other stuff. I'm kind of surprised that Sony didn't try to make some sort of money, especially for something like Days Gone, a game that I'm sure they're a little concerned in terms of how well it will do, especially since this is only really their second PC game. So I'm surprised that they didn't work out a deal with Epic, but they're becoming really close partners with Epic Games. So, potentially it's something that could happen in the future. Xbox's PC Game Pass leader was against what Epic Games was doing in terms of trying to get exclusive games. They were effectively bidding against us for content, is what Epic had to say about Xbox. So for Xbox, it was a no. And then there was this one point where I said Phil is meeting with Gabe at Valve occasionally, and some people thought that this was really interesting. Like, my mind would instantly go to something VR, but we don't really know when these conversations took place. So it's actually, maybe it was about bringing Halo to Steam, which did happen. So, I'm sure that was probably what it was all about. Now, Nintendo was the best. And what I'm reading from was from a slide. And part of that slide was, Nintendo was the third company that they talked about. And they wrote, quote, "Not started is a moonshot unto itself. Corporate history says this is a non-starter." Now, honestly, I'm all for shooting your shot. Always shoot your shot. But for Epic Games to think that Nintendo wouldn't, laugh over the phone, they probably put them on hold, and they said they probably put Epic or whoever it was, Tim Sweeney, on speakerphone. They said, "Could you repeat what you wanted from us?" And that, just to put Tim Sweeney on speakerphone, so he could say, "Yeah, we were interested in, maybe you guys would want to bring Legend of Zelda exclusively, Breath of the Wild 2 exclusively to the Epic Game Store," and them saying, "Well, hold on a second," just muting so they could all absolutely laugh at this idea. A moonshot that's one term for it, but there's literally no way that Nintendo would do something like this. Now, there were also a series of canceled or rescheduled skins and events that included J Balvin, Ariana Grande, and Lady Gaga performances. They were showing like September, October, December. The Rock was rumored to be playing the foundation of Fortnite's current season, a LeBron James outfit as part of their Icon series, alongside a Zion versus LeBron event, and a full-on arcade basketball game incorporating 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4. Other characters that were shown that they wanted to go after, but obviously never made it, include Naruto, Katniss Everdeen and the Bride, Snake Plissken and John McClane, and Terminator and Sarah Connor, which did make it into the game. Now, there was also a slide that included Master Chief, Kratos, and Samus. Now, we know that Master Chief and Kratos eventually make it into the game. A lot of people are talking about, does this mean that Samus is coming to Fortnite? I brought this up before in an older episode of this show, and I said, not a snowball's chance in hell. I guarantee you that Samus was basically an internal wish. It was on their wish list when they were bringing up characters that they wanted to bring over. And I guarantee that conversation went absolutely nowhere with Nintendo. I brought this up once again a few episodes ago on Camp Koji, which was Why would Nintendo say no to this? Is very simple. Nintendo would not allow the characters to shoot actual real guns. That's the reason why Mario has sort of like a laser, sort of like a laser blaster on Mario versus Rabbids. You can say the same thing about Samus. It's all energy weapons. It's not really shotguns or real world weapons. What Epic should have asked for actually was if they could work with Sega and Nintendo to get Bayonetta. That actually would have been the one that would have made sense. I could see Nintendo working with Sega and kind of okaying that, especially with Bayonetta 3 on the horizon. That one makes the utmost sense. Now, one of the last interesting things we found out during the trial was the first information on Walmart's cloud gaming service. This has been something we've known about for a while, but this information is the first time we've ever heard anything about it outside of its rumored development. Now, it is codenamed Project Storm and looks to provide various PC launchers via Windows for content to stream. Examples of proposed supported launchers included Ubisoft's Uplay, EA's Origin, Steam, Battle.net, Epic Games Store, and Bethesda. Alongside that, it will also have the ability to play across screens, included smartwatches, which has got to be a mistake, but I also kind of find it funny that I'll be able to play Doom Eternal on my watch. If you go out there and you look for the graphic, you'll notice that there's a watch on there, which definitely makes no sense, but I kind of hope that it actually is real. It also looks like they'll be combining multiple models, including a store to subscribe and or buy, and the ability to bring your own games over. Mark Ryan confirmed that Walmart showed him a demo running on an Android phone with an Xbox controller. He also claimed that the experience felt like playing on PlayStation 4 and was far superior to playing games on Android or iOS. Apparently, Walmart was pricing the service very competitively, including selling controller phone clips for just $2. Now, we still have no idea exactly what happened to this service. I do sort of think that Walmart is still working on it. It's very interesting to hear Mark Ryan sort of praise how well it actually works. I think it'll be interesting to see exactly what's going on there. You know, we have now so many players going into this streaming space when thinking about Amazon Luna, when thinking about, obviously, Stadia, when thinking about xCloud, that I sort of feel like this is still happening, but at the same time, I could see how Walmart saw the failure that Stadia went through. They saw that Amazon Luna is not really making any sort of impact. And I could see them sort of taking a little bit of a step back and reevaluating exactly how they launched this, because you can have the greatest technology out there. And, you know, according to Mark Ryan, it sounds really good. You can be very competitive with pricing. I think Amazon Luna is actually very, very competitively priced. It actually has a very, very good price. But I think that Walmart, and this is all just speculation just for me, is understanding that Xbox is the main competitor when it comes to streaming. Like, yes, PlayStation does have the PlayStation Now service. Nintendo has a few games streaming on their Switch, such as Control and Hitman, for example. But those aren't really your main competitors. Your main competitor is A, going to be Xbox, and B, Xbox Game Pass. So I wonder if they sort of looked at it and they sort of took a little bit of a step back. Now, what they are offering is very interesting. And what's funny is that they're offering exactly what I said that Amazon should have offered, which was PC games, and not really focusing on a console experience you could take with you, but focusing on improving what NVIDIA has done with GeForce Now, which is streaming PC titles, except you're using, you know, PC hardware that's built into a blade, a little bit similar to what Shadow is doing with Shadow PCs, except you're not actually getting access to a full-fledged Windows PC experience. You're just streaming a PC game at its utmost highest fidelity. And it sort of looks like that's what they're going for. It looks like they're trying to do as many range of devices as they can, maybe. So I sort of do feel like this is still coming, but I would understand why Walmart is still keeping it quiet, because I do think that they understood the failures that Stadia went through. And when we think of Stadia's biggest failure, it's the fact that yes, the tech was there, but they announced so much and they completely under-delivered everything that they were doing. Now, when we look at Amazon Luna, what happened to Amazon Luna? Amazon is still treating Luna as a test. It was this sort of really, really small announcement. It was hidden in a Amazon event where they were talking about Echoes. It didn't even have its own event. They're not really doing a lot when it comes to advertising. They're not even using their own Twitch platform, which sort of makes zero sense in order to really advertise Luna. Like, they're still treating Luna like it's still in this really, like, still like in this beta test phase. It doesn't look like they're really diving in and putting everything that we know that Amazon can put behind that. Now let's talk about Xbox with xCloud. We're talking about a company that has been beta testing xCloud for close to a year. Or actually, it might be over a year now. They're just starting to test iOS. They're just starting to test PC streaming. They still haven't even executed a streaming application for TV, streaming application for sticks like Roku, a dedicated streaming application for PC, being able to stream straight from your Xbox. So there's still a lot of testing for xCloud to go through, and Microsoft still isn't there. I've been testing a little bit of xCloud on iOS and PC, and it works great, but the technology, I feel like, for Microsoft isn't perfect. It still hasn't matched what I've seen from Stadia. The speed that Stadia is able to deliver, the latency is really good, but I think the speed, the execution is still what Microsoft is working on. So I think they're looking at all these other platforms and sort of trying to learn from everybody's mistakes to make sure that when they do launch it, they do a little bit more of a private closed beta period, or maybe do what I've been talking about that more companies need to do, which is a rolling release, sort of rolling out and dedicating it to one country at a time. And maybe if you're doing the United States, you're talking about rolling out to different parts of the country at one time instead of just unlocking all 50 states at once to make sure that everything is stable and ready to go. Sort of make sure to avoid all the other mistakes that these other streaming platforms have done. Now, that was pretty much everything, not every single thing that happened during that trial, but these were really the key points that happened during the trial. Now, what's next? Once again, this trial is expected to last 3 weeks. That means that there will be more happening this week, more happening next week. I mean, in terms of what will ultimately happen at the end of this, I know at one point there was a little bit of confusion coming from the judge in terms of trying to understand why Apple allows Netflix to have all their movies and TV shows in one spot, but they won't allow Xbox to do the same thing with Game Pass. For example, I thought that was interesting. What do I think is going to happen when it comes to this? I think Apple is going to win this suit. And I think the reason why they're going to win this suit is that I don't think there's still a strong enough argument to be made that Apple has a monopoly, even though I can see why they do. That's why we've all been talking about this case that's happening in Europe. That's the one that's more likely to kind of win in terms of the antitrust way of looking at it. I don't think that Apple will be forced to put other stores on their iPhone. I mean, who knows if Fortnite will even be allowed to go back on the Apple Store. And I think the biggest issue was the fact that Epic breached their contract, the fact that they kind of unlocked this alternate payment system going behind Apple and Google's backs without really telling them that it was going to happen or really giving them a lot of warning. I think that's kind of the thing that the judge is going to remember a lot, was the fact that they knowingly and purposefully breached the contract. And not only that, but they created this entire campaign around it, further proving that they knew exactly what they were doing when they did all of this. So obviously we'll have to wait and see how this plays out, but I sort of don't think it's going to go the way that Epic wants it to go. But obviously, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. Hot releases for the week. May 10th, we have Hood, Outlaws, and Legends, PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X. On May 12th, we have Jin Conception coming to PC and Switch. On May 13th, we have Lost Ruins coming to PC. May 14th, we have Subnautica Below Zero, PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X. And then on May 14th also, we have Mass Effect Legendary Edition, PC, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X. Now it's time for us to wrap it up. These are the stories that we just didn't have time to get to. Earlier this week, Hulk Hogan, the creator of the Witcher 3 HD reworked project, which swaps out many of the game's original textures with much sharper ones, announced that he had been in talks with CD Projekt Red over the upcoming next-gen release. Kotaku contacted CDPR to check up on this, who were able to confirm that, quote, in addition to our own development efforts on the upcoming next-gen version of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt for Xbox Series X, S, PlayStation 5, and PC, we're also in talks with creators of various mods for the 2015 release of the game. Now, there are two ways to look at this. There's a positive and a negative way. I think the negative way to look at this is like, what the hell is CD Projekt Red doing? Like, they can't do this work themselves. Like, they're this huge company. We just learned about them making $500 million in profit, and how The Witcher 3 is up to like, what was it, $30 or $50 million sold for the franchise. But I actually want to look at this from a positive perspective. Number one, the fact that there are discussions being had, that means that there is compensation being discussed. I doubt that they're going to add this in there for free and kind of tell these modders like, hey, you know, we'll put your names in a credit. If I'm a modder, then at that point, I would say, no, you can't have my work. Because even though the files in the IP might be proprietary, I think an argument could be made that the code is not. So any code that was written in order to put these mods into the game, I don't think that CD Projekt Red can claim that they own it, for example. So with that being said, I think this actually is a positive. And this is something that any of these modders can put on their resumes when looking for future games in the industry. And I think it's actually pretty cool to see modders get the recognition that they deserve, because most of these PC gamers look at games as they come out, but they're not actually complete until modders get their hands on it. And obviously we've seen how much fun, amazing, cool stuff that modders have been able to do with PC games. So I tend to look at it as the positive way. The World Video Game Hall of Fame class of 2021 has been announced, and Microsoft Flight Simulator, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, StarCraft, and Animal Crossing are the latest inductees. I have no argument when it comes to these four. I think they are really important to our industry, and yeah, I don't really have much more to add. I think they're all really, really good additions to the Hall of Fame. The ESA announced a new batch of companies joining E3 this year. The newest additions include Square Enix, Sega, Bandai Namco, Xseed Games, Marvelous USA, Gearbox Entertainment, Freedom Games, Devious Eye Entertainment, Turtle Beach, Verizon, and Binge.com. Now, Binge.com is actually interesting, because when I first saw it, I was like, I have no idea what this is. But if you go to their website, it's actually a site that bills itself as an immersive streaming platform created for the gaming universe. There's absolutely no other information, so we'll have to wait till E3 to find that out. But it looks like we have a new player in the streaming game. But we won't have to wait long. It's actually only 1 month until E3. I feel like this year has been going way faster than last year did, for obvious reasons. But it's kind of crazy to think that we're actually only 1 month until E3. And finally, Nintendo quietly announced a new game via a trailer last week, Game Builder Garage. It's a basic game building tool set on June 11th for about $30. Now, I'm a fan of Nintendo spontaneously announcing games, and any company. I actually like this when games are just kind of dropped by surprise, no build up or anything like that. But there actually should have been a bigger initial investment for this one in particular. I think that Nintendo should have scheduled a mini direct maybe a day after this trailer, following the announcement, to really discuss the depth of the tool set, especially since the game is only a month away. Now, I'm sure maybe at some point they'll have a mini direct, or maybe they'll talk about this a little bit more at E3. But seeing as this game comes out June 11th, which is the week of E3, it probably would have made more sense to do a mini direct kind of really, really quickly while it's still fresh in everyone's minds, rather than waiting until June to talk about the game again, especially for two things. It's only $30, which is a really good price point. And once again, the fact that it comes out June 11th, it'll be here before we know it. Shout out to Nintendo, who released their 2020 fiscal year numbers, a 34.4% increase in sales and an 85.7% increase in net profit. Now, what's crazy is that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is still the best-selling Switch game at 35 million, but Animal Crossing New Horizons is coming for the crown, sitting at 32 million, so it's almost there. The Switch console is currently sitting at 84 million sold. And shout out to Capcom. Resident Evil Village saw over 100,000 concurrent Steam players at launch, making it the biggest PC launch for any Resident Evil game, so congratulations to them. Please make sure to subscribe to the Camp Koji on your favorite podcast platform so you can listen to it on the go. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Camp Koji for future updates. Once again, I'm Joel, and I will see you all next week.